Sorry, can I just ask, did you have any advice on disputing interest for smaller debts? So, say self-employed clients, not $1 million tax debt, say $50,000, that kind of thing. Is it worth sort of going down that path to try and dispute smaller amounts?
So that's often where we come in, but we wouldn't necessarily call it a dispute. So rather, the powers that the ATO have are to remit the interest and penalties, and there's certain guidelines and legal practice requirements of the factors that they're allowed to take into consideration when remitting that interest and penalties. And so the process around that is that preparing detailed applications that cover off those grounds, so that the ATO and the officers can take into consideration what they're allowed to remit it. But it's not disputing, per se, the actual interest component.
Do you think it's worthwhile going down that path for small amounts, or...?
That's why we exist, for small amounts and big amounts. Yeah, so absolutely, if there's grounds. So it's much harder. It's not a phone call. I wouldn't say at the moment you could ever just pick up the phone and say, Mary's a great person, she's gone through difficulties, suffered through COVID, can I please have my interest and penalties? That won't work at the moment. But yes, with the right grounds and the right application, 100% it's worthwhile.
And what people don't realise is with debt officers, they have the delegation to reject, but not necessarily the delegation to accept. So, for example, if you're dealing with an APS 3 officer, they might have the delegation to remit GIC of 50 grand, right? But they have the delegation to reject any GIC request. So when you're dealing with the call centre people...
You have to be careful.
You have to be careful because most of them don't actually have the authority to accept a remission of a certain amount. That's why it's worth it to see a specialist like Olga, pretty much.
And sometimes we'll hear stories from different people that they've got what they thought were their tricks. So you ring up on a Friday afternoon and they'll just give it to you because they want to get you off the phone. Or you ring up on a Monday morning. But what can happen in those circumstances is exactly what Tuan said. If they do want you off the phone, they'll reject the application. And then what happens is when you ring up again, the first call note, or when you actually lodge an application, the first call note will say rejected application. So then you're starting from so far behind the 8 ball, especially with new staff that are running off scripts that don't have the same knowledge because it's already been rejected.
And in regards to the GIC and the penalties that the ATO kindly add on for late lodgements and not paying on time and things like that, historically they used to quite often just waive those out of the gate. Is that happening at the moment, or does it?
No, so they would never necessarily just waive them straight away. Maybe on those smaller debts they might have. But what we're seeing now is it's much, much harder than it was even 6 months ago. We still will make an application earlier than the full debt being paid off. A lot of people think that if the full debt's paid off, it's an automatic given. Once the debt's paid off, that they'll remit the GIC and you can get all of that back. It's not a given. And at the moment, that's absolutely changed. It is not a given at all that if your debt's paid off, like Tuan said, they consider the full amount a debt. And we will make applications much earlier, but what we're seeing now is that they need to see compliance and they need clients to be in a compliant position before you even start to talk about a remission of a GIC.